The demolition supervisor was already raising his hand when Shadow stopped. Before dawn, the Gulf Coast Rail Depot looked like the storm had reached down with both hands and tried to peel it open. Freight cars sat half derailed in mud and oil-slick water. Bent signal posts leaned like snapped reeds. Floodlights threw hard white circles across twisted metal and puddles that reflected the sky in bruised shades of purple and black. The air smelled of diesel, wet plywood, salt, and the faint metallic bite that followed electrical fires. Officer Ethan Cole stood 40 feet from the nearest damaged car with one hand on Shadow's harness and his eyes on the demolition crew's setup. The city wanted the unstable line cleared before sunrise. Too many structures were compromised. Too many crews were working too many emergency sites at once. The official language was efficiency. The real condition was exhaustion. Shadow had been running a standard pre-blast sweep along the rail line with the quiet precision Ethan trusted more than most spoken briefings. The German shepherd moved with his usual economy, low head, measured breath, each turn of muscle purposeful, no wasted motion. He was all black saddle and sable fur, darkened by mist, his frame lean and powerful under the harness, his eyes almost amber under the floodlights. Then, halfway past a buckled refrigerator car with its doors chained shut, he froze. Not a hesitation, not uncertainty, a total stop. His whole body changed, spine locked, ears forward, nose lifted once, then again. He made a low sound in his throat that Ethan felt more than heard. The demolition supervisor shouted from behind the tape, "Cole, we're live in 2 minutes." Ethan did not answer immediately. He watched Shadow. The dog stepped left, pulling hard toward the chained car. Ethan followed the line of tension in the harness and saw what mattered most. Shadow was not excited. He was certain. "Shadow," Ethan said softly. The dog looked back once, briefly, enough to say the same thing he always said, with that look. "I'm here. Pay attention." Ethan turned. "Hold the detonation." The supervisor threw both hands up. "We do not have time for another full cycle." "You've got one now," Ethan said. "That car was cleared yesterday." "Then today we clear it again." The supervisor started toward him, angry words already forming, but Captain Maria Hayes stepped in from the perimeter with a posture that ended arguments before they fully opened. Rain stippled her dark uniform jacket. Her face was drawn from too many 16-hour days, but her gaze was sharp and unsparing. "What's the issue?" "Shadow hit on the sealed car," Ethan said. The supervisor answered first. "We already checked manifests. Empty refrigerated unit, flood compromised, unsafe to enter. We're supposed to drop the whole section before daylight." Hayes looked at Ethan, not the supervisor. "Your read?" Ethan kept his hand on Shadow's harness. The dog was pulling steadily now, not frantic, not theatrical, locked in. "My read is he doesn't do this for ghosts." Hayes nodded once. "Then we open it." The chain came off under protest and sparks. One worker muttered about delays, another about liability, but nobody pushed past Hayes twice. Ethan moved forward with Shadow beside him as the warped door groaned and peeled open a foot, then 2, then enough for the trapped air inside to spill out. It smelled like spoiled insulation, rust, mold, and fear. Shadow went rigid. Ethan swept his light into the dark. At first he saw only shrink-wrap pallets collapsed against one wall and watermarks climbing chest-high inside the car. Then the beam shifted lower and caught the pale oval of a face tucked behind a broken crate. A child, small, soaked, motionless except for her eyes. She flinched from the light but did not scream. There was no energy left in her for that. "Easy," Ethan said at once, voice low. "You're okay." He crouched, but the girl only pressed farther back into the shadows, both hands clenched around a blue access card hanging from a broken lanyard. To her right, half under a tarp, lay a man in a courier jacket, very still, one arm twisted under him at an angle no living body held by choice. Hayes was beside Ethan in 3 strides. Her expression changed once, sharply, then settled again. "EMS! Now!" The child's eyes darted between the uniforms, the lights, the movement, and grew wider with each new shape. She was close to bolting into full animal panic. Then Shadow, who had not taken his gaze off her once, lowered himself slowly onto the wet metal floor of the freight car. No command, no performance. He simply lay down, head low, body angled away enough to reduce pressure, presenting calm instead of interest. The girl looked at him. Something in her breathing changed. Not calm, not yet, but the first loosening. Ethan saw it and did not waste it. "Shadow stays," he said quietly to Hayes. Hayes took in the scene, the child, the card, the dead courier, the dog, and said, "Do it." So Ethan unclipped Shadow's lead. The shepherd moved exactly 6 inches forward, then stopped. His ears stayed upright. His eyes stayed soft. The girl stared at him for a long moment, then lifted one hand off the access card and touched 2 fingers to his fur. That was when Ethan knew this was no storm accident. Because dying men did not crawl into sealed rail cars with children and municipal vault credentials unless they were running from something worse than the weather. Underscore 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 by 7:10 a.m. The child was wrapped in a county emergency blanket in an interview room with Shadow lying at her feet and an untouched cup of juice warming on the table. She had not given a name. She had not answered a single direct question. But she had not let go of the blue card. Ethan leaned against the glass outside the room while Captain Hayes stood beside him, reading the preliminary dispatch summary on a tablet. The fluorescent lights made everything look more tired than it was. "Card belongs to City Evidence Management," Hayes said. "Mid-level access, storm exception clearance, municipal vault annex." "That doesn't fit a rail car." "No." Inside the room, the girl's hand rested in Shadow's neck fur like she was anchoring herself to the one thing in the building that had not asked her for words. Hayes looked at Ethan. "Talk to her?" "She's not ready for questions. She's choosing him first." Hayes followed his gaze. "You trust that?" "I trust what people do before they decide what story to tell." Hayes gave the slightest nod. "Fine, we move around her, not through her." She handed him the tablet. Photos of the courier flashed up. Male, mid-30s, employed through a private storm logistics contractor. No obvious record, no obvious reason to die in a freight car with evidence access. "Purge on the annex starts at 10:00, Hayes said. "Emergency water damage disposal. Thousands of items are being triaged." Ethan looked up. "That's convenient." "Exactly." She lowered her voice. "Officially, I'm assigning you to follow the card and verify chain of custody contamination risks before disposal begins. Unofficially, I think someone tried to hide something in a city that's too overwhelmed to notice." "External pressure?" Hayes almost smiled, but there was no humor in it. "External pressure is all anyone has right now. FEMA reps, State Recovery Board, Mayor's Office, contractors, auditors coming next week. Every phone call wants the same thing, fewer complications. And you? I want to know why a dead courier with city vault access ended up in a sealed rail car with a silent child." That was why Ethan respected her. She never mistook simplification for order. He pushed off the glass. "I need Lena." "She's already in the annex. Lucas is on his way to you." As if summoned by name, Deputy Lucas Reed jogged down the hallway with a folder under one arm, tie half undone, hair still damp from rain. He was all restless energy and bright attention, young enough that the city had not finished sanding the urgency out of him. "Morning," Lucas said, breathless. "If this is one of those mornings where you say, 'easy day,' and then we nearly drown in a culvert, I'd like to formally object in advance." Ethan took the folder. "You can object after you carry boxes." Lucas glanced through the interview room glass and saw the girl with Shadow. The humor faded from his face. "She okay?" "No." Lucas absorbed that without performing sympathy. One of his better qualities. "What do we know?" "Not enough." Hayes stepped away to take a call, already shifting into command mode. Ethan watched her go, then looked back at the child. Shadow lifted his head and met Ethan's eyes through the glass. "Hold steady," that look said. Ethan had built his career on reading what didn't shout, on waiting the extra beat most people filled with noise. It had made him seem cold to some people, difficult to rush to others, and dependable to exactly the ones who mattered. He opened the interview room door slowly. The girl stiffened. Shadow did not move. Ethan crouched a few feet away, keeping his hands visible. "I'm Ethan," he said. "You don't have to talk." Her gaze stayed on him, wary, measuring. He nodded toward the card. "You can keep holding that." No response. Was that man trying to bring you somewhere safe? A flicker, barely there. Ethan did not press. Okay. He let the silence sit, not empty, just unforced. Rain tapped the narrow window. Somewhere down the hall, a phone rang twice and stopped. Finally, the girl whispered, not to Ethan, but into Shadow's fur. They were going to burn it. Ethan felt the room sharpen. What were they going to burn? Her hand tightened on the card. The room with the shelves. The annex. Did the man tell you to keep that card? A nod. Did he say who they are? She shook her head fast. Fear rose instantly, visible in the tremor under her blanket. Ethan eased back. That's enough. He stood and walked out without taking the card, without asking her name, without undoing the trust Shadow had bought with sheer calm presence. Outside, Lucas was waiting. Well? She just told us not to let the annex purge happen. Lucas blinked. That's direct. Let's go. The Municipal Evidence Annex sat 6 blocks inland from the original police complex, a concrete municipal warehouse retrofitted 20 years earlier and never meant to survive a major flood. Pumps groaned outside. Sandbags sagged at the side doors. Inside, the smell was wet cardboard, mildew, ozone, and the sour stress of people trying to save too much with too little time. Dr. Lena Moore stood in the center aisle of the intake section wearing nitrile gloves and a dark raincoat over plain clothes, reading a stack of environmental logs with the expression she reserved for data that offended her personally. She was brilliant in the way some people were dangerous, quietly, precisely, without any need to advertise. Her dark hair was pinned up carelessly. Her eyes missed nothing. "You're late," she said without looking up. "We found a child in a freight car," Lucas said. Lena looked up then. "That'll do it." Ethan handed her a photo of the blue access card. "What do you have?" She took the photo, set it beside 3 printed vault reports, and tapped the pages with one gloved finger. "I have inventory records that disagree with themselves in ways weather cannot explain. Timestamps altered in batch blocks. Moisture damage reports filed before the floodwater reached the levels required to cause them. Disposal priority flags added from an admin terminal that should have been offline. Inside job, Lucas said. Inside access, Lena corrected. Maybe more than one set of hands, definitely intentional. Ethan scanned the room. Forklifts moved in slow backup beep rhythms. Clerks sorted bins under plastic sheeting. On paper, it looked like chaotic recovery. Underneath, it felt curated. Where would someone hide that? Ethan asked. Lena lifted a chin toward the deeper vault section. Not in the damaged rows, too obvious. In the transfer zone between damaged and salvaged, where every box can disappear as a paperwork dispute. Captain Hayes joined them from the side corridor. You have until 9:40 before City Legal gets here and starts reciting emergency disposal authority at me. Then we move now, Ethan said. Hayes looked around at the wet maze of shelves and overworked clerks. No sirens, no public scene. If this is corruption tied to disaster supplies, someone is counting on the city being too tired to look closely. Someone's about to be disappointed, Lucas muttered. Hayes pointed at him. Careful, you say lines like that before we've earned them. That almost drew a smile from Lena. Ethan knelt by Shadow and offered the photo card to his nose. The dog inhaled once, then turned immediately toward the vault interior. Show me. Shadow moved, not quickly, not dramatically, just with unbroken purpose down the center aisle, then left through the salvage corridor, then right into a section marked Water-Compromised Media. He stopped at a locked cage where 3 steel transfer bins sat tagged for disposal. One of the clerks, hurrying past, slowed. Those already got signed. By who? Ethan asked. The clerk looked at his badge, then at Hayes, then at the tags. Storm recovery admin, I think. It's been nonstop. Lena stepped in, reading the tags. These signatures are printed over prior entries. Ethan looked at the lock. Open it. The clerk hesitated. Hayes said, Now? Inside the first transfer bin were damaged ledgers and moldy case files. Inside the second, electronics bagged for destruction. Inside the third, beneath a layer of warped binders, Ethan found sealed evidence pouches containing shipping seals, 3 handheld scanners, and a waterproof notebook wrapped in contractor plastic. Lena took the notebook and flipped it open carefully. Her face changed. What? This isn't standard evidence cataloging. She turned a page. This is movement tracking. Dates, routes, inventory counts, depot codes. Whoever wrote this was recording shipments. Relief shipments? Lucas asked. Lena nodded slowly. Medical, water purification units, insulin coolers, antibiotics, portable generators. Ethan looked around the annex as the shape of it locked into place. Not looting. No, Lena said. Organized diversion. Hayes exhaled once, quietly, and our dead courier was preserving proof. A crash sounded from somewhere deeper in the annex. Everyone turned. A forklift worker shouted. Another voice answered too fast, too loud. Shadow's ears snapped up. Ethan did not wait. Lucas, with me? They moved toward the rear loading section where rows of temporary pallets stood under blue tarps. A side exit banged open in the distance. Shadow surged forward, scenting through damp concrete and diesel haze. By the time Ethan reached the rear bay, the door at the loading dock was swinging on its hinge and rain was blowing in hard. No person in sight. Only fresh tire spray outside and one dropped clipboard skidding through water. Lucas grabbed it. Route sheets. Ethan looked over his shoulder. Read. Lucas scanned fast. Depot transfer, municipal reserve intake, old surge control pump station. Lena had followed, notebook in hand. That matches 2 entries in the ledger. Same code block repeated after inventory was marked destroyed. Hayes' expression hardened. How much time? Lucas checked the sheet. Pump transfer scheduled final tonight. Auditors due tomorrow afternoon. The room seemed to constrict, not because the case got bigger, because it got live. Ethan looked down at Shadow. The dog's nose stayed pointed into the storm. He was already ahead of them. The next 6 hours turned the city into a map of absences. The official record said certain trucks had moved one way. Fuel receipts suggested another. Dispatch logs listed cleanup convoys that no camera had ever seen. Depot rosters contained names linked to staffing agencies that dissolved on paper the week after the storm made landfall. Lucas rode shotgun with a tablet balanced on one knee, pulling route comparisons with a speed sharpened by adrenaline. These lanes all fold toward the industrial canal, he said. Every ghost shipment does the same thing, touches a legitimate disaster transfer, then disappears one layer downstream. Lena's voice came through Ethan's phone from the annex. The notebook writer was careful. Entries stop every time the goods hit a city-authorized transfer point. After that, separate ledger references, hidden inventory. Meaning? Ethan asked. Meaning the final proof isn't here. It's wherever they stored the real counts. Ethan drove through standing water under a sky the color of gunmetal. Shadow stood braced in the rear, nose working the air through the cracked partition. Hayes called next. State Recovery Board just pushed again. They want the annex purge certified before end of day. That's interesting. No, Ethan, it's pressure. Same thing, different suit. A beat. Hayes did not disagree. You have one shot at this before someone above me decides you're generating headlines. Then I'll make it count. He hung up and turned down a flooded access road toward the Canal District. Warehouses hunched behind chain link. Relief banners snapped in the wind above lots that should have been empty and weren't. Twice Shadow alerted them to hidden stockpiles in structures filed as condemned, boxed antibiotics in one, water purification cartridges in another. Enough to prove diversion, not enough to break the network. What Ethan needed was the ledger Lena kept circling in her language, the thing behind the thing, the record no one would destroy unless it could convict. By mid-afternoon, rain returned in heavy gray sheets. They parked under the shell of an overpass and reviewed what they had. Lucas rubbed both hands over his face. We've got motive, pattern, physical goods, fake routing, a dead courier, a terrified child, and still nothing that says who's giving the orders. We don't need names first, Ethan said. We need what they're trying to erase tonight. Lucas looked at him. Pump station? Has to be. Why store anything there? Because nobody thinks to search a place everyone agrees is failing. Shadow rose in the rear compartment and gave a single sharp bark. Ethan turned. The dog's focus was fixed on the courier clipboard lying on the seat. Ethan picked it up again. This time he flipped past the route sheets to the back cover. There, half peeled and almost invisible, was a maintenance decal. Canal Surge Control Substation 4. Old pump station, not a transfer point. A vault. Lucas leaned close. So the shipment sheets weren't the destination, they were camouflage. Ethan felt the whole pattern align. The courier was moving proof out of the pump station, got intercepted before he could make the annex. And the child? Witness or family? Or just the only person he trusted enough to carry the card if he went down? Rain hammered the roof above them. Traffic hissed somewhere beyond the columns. The city sounded tired all the way through. Lucas looked out toward the gray industrial district. You ever get the feeling some places are waiting for bad things? Ethan started the engine. Yes. Lucas glanced back at Shadow. You too? Shadow said nothing, but his stare toward the canal answered well enough. The old surge control pump station sat on a concrete tongue of land jutting into black water, half retired, half cannibalized by emergency repairs since the storm. Massive intake grates lined the canal edge. Rust streaked the walls below dead windows. Backup generators throbbed somewhere inside, unevenly, like a tired heart. By the time Ethan and Lucas reached it, the sky had gone from storm gray to the false near night that came before a second front hit. Captain Hayes met them under the overhang with a city engineer and one patrol unit. No more. Too many uniforms would spook whoever was already inside. The engineer says the lower service tunnels are still accessible, Hayes said. Barely. Any official crews logged here tonight? Ethan asked. 3. 2 can be confirmed. 1 cannot. Lena's sedan slid in behind them moments later. She stepped out holding printouts in a waterproof case. I found your ledger reference. She spread the pages across the hood of Hayes's SUV, pinning them with a flashlight. The notebook uses abbreviated item classes matched to environmental storage codes. One code repeats whenever the diverted shipments include high-value medical stock. That code corresponds to dry archival mezzanine spaces in pre-flood municipal infrastructure. Hayes frowned. In English. The pump station was used as emergency overflow storage after the first levee repair failed 3 years ago. Someone remembered. Lucas whistled softly. That is deeply unpleasant. Lena ignored him and pointed to a hand-marked annotation on the copied route sheet. This note matters. Burn room before count. Ethan's eyes narrowed. Not burn the goods. Burn the room. Destroy the records and whatever stock remains, Lena said. If auditors arrive tomorrow and the room is gone under flood or fire, everything becomes storm loss. Hayes looked at the station looming over them. Then tonight is the closeout. Thunder rolled over the canal. Shadow stood beside Ethan with every line of his body aimed at the building. Hayes caught Ethan's eye. You know this can go ugly fast. It already did. We just found it late. She nodded. I'll hold perimeter and keep official traffic away as long as I can. Lucas goes with you. Lucas straightened. Happy to. Hayes gave him a level look. You're with Ethan because he knows how to come back alive, so listen more than you improvise. Yes, ma'am. Lena handed Ethan a waterproof evidence satchel. If you find paper ledgers, do not trust the room conditions. Bag first, read later. Understood. She hesitated, then added more quietly, And Ethan, if Shadow stops, you stop. Don't let urgency make you stupid. That almost got a smile from him. You say that like it's a pattern. With men? Broadly. Lucas let out a breath that might have been a laugh if the night were less serious. Then the wind shifted, carrying a smell out from the pump station interior, wet cement, machine oil, and something harsher underneath. Accelerant. Shadow's head snapped up. Ethan looked at the dog once and felt that familiar, grounding certainty settle into him. The thing that happened when the noise of urgency dropped away and all that remained was the line between what mattered and what didn't. Let's go. Inside, the pump station sounded alive in all the wrong ways. Water slammed distant conduits. Metal groaned overhead. Emergency lights pulsed weak amber along stained walls. Every corridor smelled of damp neglect and recent human interference. This was not a place meant for calm choices. Shadow led them down a service ramp slick with algae and old flood residue. Ethan kept one hand near the dog's harness, the other on his flashlight. Lucas followed close, trying not to let his boots slip on concrete polished by years of runoff. They reached a junction where one tunnel descended toward the intake pumps and another angled up through old admin storage. Shadow stopped, turned right, then looked back. Up, Ethan said. They moved. Halfway along the corridor, Lucas froze. Hear that? At first, Ethan heard only generators and rain, then, faintly, the clink of metal on metal. Deliberate. Human. Shadow gave a low warning rumble. Ethan killed his light. Lucas did the same. In the dim emergency glow ahead, a shadow moved across a doorway at the end of the hall. Ethan lifted 2 fingers. Hold. The figure disappeared. Then came the sharp hiss of liquid pouring. Accelerant. Ethan moved fast now, silent and committed. He reached the doorway and swung the beam through. Storage mezzanine, shelves, steel lockers, plastic bins. A room large enough to hold a city's secrets. And near the center, 2 men in contractor rain gear dumping fuel over boxed inventory and a row of archive cabinets. One of them turned at the light. Police! He never finished. Shadow launched past Ethan on command, without the word fully spoken, a dark force through amber strobe light. One saboteur stumbled backward, crashing into a cabinet. The other bolted for the side exit. Lucas! Lucas took the runner, crashing into him shoulder first at the door. Both men slammed into the wall and went down hard. Ethan hit the first saboteur before he could reach for the flare tucked at his belt. He drove him flat, wrenched the flare away, and cuffed him against the wet concrete while Shadow stood over them, silent now, waiting. Then the room changed. A red blink pulsed under the lowest archive shelf. Then another. Then 2 more farther back. Explosives. Not enough to level the building, enough to flood it, burn it, destroy the room. Out! Lucas shouted. But Ethan was already moving deeper inside, because on the far wall, above the cabinets, he could see box labels matching Lena's copied codes. This was the room, and if they left without the ledger, the bombs would finish what the courier died trying to prevent. 30 seconds, maybe, Lucas said, breath ragged. Ethan! Shadow surged toward the back shelves and began pawing at a low metal locker half concealed behind stacked supply crates. Ethan dropped beside him. You've got something? Shadow barked once. The locker was jammed. Ethan pulled. Nothing. Lucas shoved the detained saboteur against a pipe and ran back. Move! Together they heaved the crates aside. Ethan jammed his pry bar under the locker lip. The metal screamed, bent, then tore open. Inside sat 3 waterproof document tubes, a hard drive case, and a handwritten ledger wrapped in contractor plastic. There it was. The real count. The thing worth killing for. Ethan stuffed everything into Lena's satchel. Now! The first charge detonated behind them. Not a fireball, a brutal concussive slam that blew out 2 overhead lights and sent muddy water erupting through a wall seam. The room lurched. Shelves rattled. Somewhere below, machinery screamed. Move! They ran. Water chased them down the corridor in a sudden black surge from the ruptured pipe run. Lucas nearly went down at the junction, caught himself on the wall, then shouted as the second charge blew somewhere in the lower tunnel. Emergency lights died. Darkness swallowed the station except for Ethan's flashlight beam and the red exit strips half submerged at floor level. Shadow was already ahead, then back, then ahead again, tracking not just a route, but the safest route. Ethan knew that gate. The dog was solving live terrain. Left! Lucas yelled over the roar. Shadow cut right. Ethan followed Shadow. Lucas hesitated one fatal fraction of a second between human instinct and canine certainty, then followed Ethan. The left corridor collapsed behind them with a slab of concrete and a wall of water. Lucas stared once, stunned. Okay, right. We're trusting the dog forever now. No one answered. There was no breath for it. They climbed a maintenance ladder into a narrow service conduit while floodwater rose below. Ethan shoved the evidence satchel upward, then pushed Lucas ahead. Shadow sprang rung to rung beside them, with impossible balance. At the top hatch, Ethan shoved and got nothing. Stuck. Water hammered below, climbing. Lucas looked down once and went pale. Ethan! Shadow barked sharply in Ethan's ear, then shifted, pawing not at the hatch, but at the rusted side release wheel. Of course. Not jammed. Locked. Ethan spun the wheel. The hatch gave. Cold air and rain burst in as they spilled onto the exterior catwalk 30 feet above the canal. Below them, water blew out the station's side vents in dirty white torrents. Somewhere behind, another internal detonation punched sparks through a window. Hayes' voice came from the perimeter below, magnified and urgent. Cole! We're up. Do you have it? Ethan held up the satchel. For the first time that night, Captain Maria Hayes let visible relief cross her face. Then a final figure burst through a lower door on the far side of the station, trying to vanish into the storm with a hard case under one arm. The supervisor, or the courier's killer, or both. Doesn't matter, Ethan thought. The last one running always tells you where the true center was. He looked at Shadow. The dog was already locked on. Track! Shadow flew down the catwalk stairs and into the rain. The man hit the canal path at full speed, slipping on slick concrete, cutting toward the intake road where a black SUV idled without lights. Lucas shouted position. Hayes' patrol unit swung wide to intercept. The fugitive made it 20 yards before Shadow hit him low and clean, taking him off his feet in a spray of rainwater and grit. Ethan reached them seconds later. The hard case had popped open in the fall. Inside were stamped municipal seals, burner phones, and a second notebook. Operations layer, command layer, the part that turned theft into conspiracy. The man on the ground looked up through rain, hate, and fear warring behind his eyes. You have no idea how many people needed this buried. Ethan cuffed him without hurry. That's the kind of sentence I like hearing on body cam. Hayes arrived, breathing hard, patrol lights washing the canal road blue and red. She looked from the second notebook to the station vomiting water into the night. Tell me the room's gone, she said. Room's damaged, Ethan answered. Evidence survived. Hayes let out one long breath through her nose. Then they lost. The city looked different at 3:40 a.m., not healed, not cleaner, not even quieter, but different, because truth, once pulled into the open, changed the shape of every hallway it entered. By dawn, the child was in protective custody under Hayes' authority, with trauma staff, a juvenile advocate, and explicit instructions that no one push beyond what she wanted to say. She finally gave a name to the social worker, but Ethan never asked for it directly. He didn't need ownership of that moment. Lena spent the morning in the crime lab with the ledgers, hard drives, and seized notebooks, building what she called the bridge between instinct and court. By noon, she had matched inventory codes to missing federal relief stock, linked false disposal logs to annex edits, and isolated enough chain of custody contamination to trigger a wider corruption task force, whether the city wanted one or not. Lucas, running on bad coffee and the sharp exhilaration of surviving something real, processed transport records with a steadier hand than he'd had a week ago. Some part of him had crossed over during the flood, out of the reflex to prove himself and into the quieter confidence of someone who finally understood what competence felt like from the inside. Captain Hayes did what she did best. She made the right thing official before anyone with cleaner shoes could smother it. She suspended the annex purge, sealed the pump station records, and reopened every storm-loss disposal case tied to the stolen inventory channels. When outside officials pushed, she pushed back harder, but with paper, authority, and timing instead of volume. And Ethan sat for 10 minutes on the rear steps of the precinct under clearing skies with Shadow beside him and let the adrenaline drain. The dog leaned his shoulder into Ethan's leg with that silent, matter-of-fact weight that always said the same thing. We're here, still here. Ethan rested a hand in the thick fur at Shadow's neck and watched the clouds break over a city that had spent too many days pretending collapse and concealment were the same thing. Lucas stepped out of the back door carrying 2 coffees. He handed one over. Captain says the guy from the canal is talking. He'd better be. He is. Apparently, when your organization starts collapsing in real time, loyalty develops limits. Ethan took the coffee. Useful discovery. Lucas sat one step lower. You know what I keep thinking about? That you nearly took the wrong tunnel? That too. Lucas looked out over the lot. I keep thinking the whole thing turned because Shadow stopped at that rail car. One decision, one refusal to keep moving. Ethan glanced at the dog. He knew. Lucas shook his head, half awed, half amused. You always say that like it's simple. It is simple, not easy. Lucas absorbed that. Hayes wants me on the expanded case team. That's good. She also told me the sentence I had a feeling is banned from my report writing. That's better. That finally got a real laugh out of Lucas. A few minutes later, Lena found them with a stack of folders against her chest. For the record, I dislike being correct in ways that reveal municipal rot on this scale. Ethan looked up. But you are. Yes. She shifted the folders. Also, the courier's notebook includes one final page addressed to whoever found it. Not by name, just instructions. He knew he might not make it. What did it say? Lena hesitated, which for her meant the words mattered. It said, "Don't let them call this storm loss. Count it properly." Ethan looked away for a moment toward the brightening yard. That was the whole fight, really. Not just against theft, against erasure, against the easy administrative lie that if suffering happened during a disaster, then the disaster itself had done it, and no human hand needed blame. Shadow lifted his head suddenly. Across the lot, under the watch of an advocate and a uniformed officer, the child stood near the rear fence. She was looking at him, at Shadow. Ethan rose, coffee forgotten, on the step. He did not go all the way to her. He stopped halfway and waited. Shadow stood at his side, alert but soft. The girl came the rest of the distance herself. Up close, she looked smaller than she had in the rail car. Not weaker, just finely visible as a child instead of a survival reflex wrapped in a blanket. She held something out, the blue access card. Ethan took it carefully. "You kept it safe." A tiny nod. "You helped us." Her eyes dropped to Shadow. "He found me." "Yes." She knelt and put both arms around the dog's neck. Shadow stood perfectly still and let her. When she rose again, she looked at Ethan and managed 4 words that sounded like they had traveled a long distance to reach daylight. "You listened to him." Ethan glanced down at Shadow, then back at her. "Always?" She gave the smallest, tiredest, almost smile and let the advocate guide her back inside. Lena stood beside Ethan now. "That should probably be in your official report." "It won't survive review." "Tragic." He looked at her. "You're in a mood." "I spent 9 hours proving that theft hidden inside emergency bureaucracy is still theft." "Fair." She handed him one of the folders. "Prelim findings. Enough for charges. Enough for federal seizure. Enough for Hayes to ruin several polished careers before lunch." "Good." Lena watched the child disappear through the door. "For what it's worth, Ethan, the city doesn't usually get to keep the things that save it. People leave. Cases get diluted. Stories get edited. This one might not." He understood what she meant. Not victory. Record. Count it properly. He looked out over the lot, the storm-washed sky, the tired building, the dog at his side. "Then let's make sure it doesn't." By evening, every version of the lie had begun to fail. The official line, storm chaos, unfortunate loss, emergency disposal, contractor confusion, could not survive ledgers, hard drives, duplicate seals, livestock recoveries, falsified logs, annex tampering, and a pump station full of planted charges. Once Lena's chain analysis went up the ladder and Hayes locked the city side down, the rest became arithmetic. How much was stolen, where it went, who signed, who looked away, who profited. That part belonged to committees, prosecutors, auditors, and the long machinery of consequence. What belonged to Ethan was simpler. That night he took Shadow back to the rail depot one last time. The damaged cars were gone now. The line was open. Fresh gravel had been laid over gouged mud. Portable lights hummed over crews finishing repair work. The place looked ordinary in the way crime scenes always tried to, once they had given up their secrets. Ethan stood where Shadow had first stopped and watched the dog scent the cleaner air. No body, no child, no chain on the door. Just the memory of a moment when the whole course of the city had changed because one living creature refused to move on command. He knelt beside Shadow. "You knew there was one more thing in there worth saving." Shadow nudged his shoulder once, not praise-seeking, just confirmation. Ethan rested his forehead briefly against the dog's. Some partnerships were noisy, some were decorated in speeches and public-facing language about service and excellence and outcomes. This one lived somewhere quieter, in halted steps, in chosen patience, in trusting what could not yet be proved, in moving when it mattered and holding still when that mattered more. Behind them, thunder rolled far out over the Gulf, but the city itself held. Lights burned across the rail district, across the annex, across hospitals that would now receive supplies meant for them, across neighborhoods that would get clean water because no one managed to erase the count in time. Captain Hayes would keep pushing. Lena would keep proving. Lucas would keep learning how to let urgency mature into judgment. And Ethan Cole, with Shadow at his side, would keep doing what he had done from the first second in front of that sealed rail car. Stay steady, listen closely, refuse the easy version. Because sometimes justice did not arrive as a brilliant idea or a dramatic confession. Sometimes it arrived as a dog going still in the rain, and a man wise enough to stop with him. Captain Maria Hayes did not believe in victory laps. By 20 o'clock hours, she was in the command conference room with 3 binders open, 2 phones face down, and a legal pad filled in her compact, slanted handwriting. The overhead lights were too bright. The coffee at her elbow had gone cold. Rain still traced thin lines down the black windows, though the storm had lost most of its violence. Outside, the city was moving from emergency into aftermath, which in Hayes's experience was when people with polished titles began trying to reframe reality before reality hardened into record. She had no intention of allowing that. On the wall monitor, a grid of names and agencies continued to populate as notifications went out. Municipal procurement oversight, State Emergency Logistics Review, Internal Affairs, Federal Disaster Fraud Liaison, District Attorney Intake, Public Corruption Task Force. None of those names comforted her. Systems were useful, but only when forced to look directly at what they preferred to smooth over. She turned a page in the ledger photocopy and read the same line again. Insulin coolers, diverted. Her jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Not numbers, not abstractions, not administrative irregularities. People had gone without what they needed because someone had looked at a drowning city and seen inventory margins. The door opened without a knock because only one person in the department entered her office like a thought continuing itself. Dr. Lena Moore crossed the room holding another document tray against one hip. Her raincoat was gone. In its place she wore a charcoal blouse with the sleeves rolled once at the wrists, as if practicality could still impose order on a day like this. Strands of hair had escaped from the knot at the back of her head. Her face was pale with fatigue, but her eyes were alive in the exact way they became when she had moved past curiosity and into proof. "I have enough," Lena said. Hayes looked up. "Enough for charges?" "Enough that anyone refusing charges will need to explain themselves in writing." That from Lena was close to triumph. Hayes leaned back slightly. "Tell me." Lena set the tray down and began laying out the evidence in a sequence that would have looked clinical to anyone who didn't know her. Hayes knew better. This was not detachment. This was anger translated into order. "First," Lena said, tapping the courier's waterproof notebook, "movement logs cross-reference with actual incoming disaster stock in a way opportunistic theft couldn't manage. Whoever organized this had access to intake forecasts before arrival." She tapped the annex inventory exports next. "Second, altered timestamps at the Municipal Evidence Vault matched 2 admin terminals and 1 remote credential bridge that should not have existed after emergency network partitioning. Someone deliberately reopened a pathway." "Internal?" "Yes, or internal credentials used externally. Either way, not random." Next came the hard drive printouts. Third, the drive recovered from the pump station contained shipment diversions disguised as spoilage losses. Not all of them succeeded. Some were interrupted, which means the pattern likely began smaller and expanded as the storm response became harder to audit in real time. Hayes read a highlighted line. "Medical Cache 7, rerouted to condemnation hold." Lena nodded, and then vanished. Hayes looked up. "You sound personal about this." Lena went still for a fraction of a second, then answered plainly. "My brother's dialysis clinic operated on emergency allotment for 2 days after the surge. They almost ran out of sterile line kits." Hayes held her gaze. "Was it connected?" "I don't know." Lena's voice stayed even. "That's not the point." But both of them knew it was part of the point. Every ledger line touched a body eventually. Hayes closed the binder softly. "You did good work." Lena accepted the sentence with the slight tilt of her chin she gave to praise she had neither requested nor intended to perform modesty about. "Ethan did the good work. Shadow did the impossible work. I translated." "No." Hayes's tone sharpened just enough to stop that line where it stood. "Cole and Shadow opened the door. You made sure nobody could close it again." Lena looked at her for a moment, then nodded once. "All right." Hayes glanced toward the window. "Where is he?" "Rear lot, with Shadow. Lucas was with him 20 minutes ago." Hayes allowed herself the smallest exhale. "Good. Leave him there a little longer." Lena followed her gaze. You think he knows what this saved? Hayes thought of the rail car, the child, the pump station, the neatly typed disposal authority forms waiting at the annex like a bureaucratic grave. Yes, she said, I think he always knows. He just doesn't talk like other people when he does. A beat passed. Then Lena said, quieter, he trusts that dog the way other people trust Radar. That's because Radar lies differently. For the first time all day, Lena gave a real smile. It vanished almost at once, but it had existed, and that counted. Hayes rose and gathered the files. I'm locking everything now before city legal decides urgency is a substitute for conscience. On her way out, Lena paused at the door. Maria, Hayes looked up. Whatever comes next, don't let them reduce this to procurement fraud. Hayes's mouth flattened. I had no such intention. Because procurement fraud sounded tidy, procedural, almost boring. This had not been boring. This had been children in sealed freight cars, empty hospital shelves, water, darkness, explosives, and men betting on weather to hide their decisions. This had been moral rot wearing reflective contractor tape. She carried the files down the hallway like she was carrying weight that must not be dropped, and perhaps she was. In the forensic lab downstairs, the air was cold enough to sting damp skin. Lena stood over the recovered hard drive case while a technician across the room processed image captures under her direction. She preferred doing the final verification herself, not because she distrusted the team, but because precision was an ethic to her, not a habit. The ledger sat under a document drying hood, each page stabilized under low heat and airflow, names, figures, codes, routes, ordinary handwriting with catastrophic implications. She had seen 1,000 kinds of damage in her career. Blood, fire, decomposition, corruption in its familiar physical forms. But paper like this was its own species of wound, because it recorded the moment greed crossed over from intention into architecture. She flipped through the digital extraction on one monitor and watched the overlapping systems emerge in layers. Annex edits, fake moisture reports, contractor dispatch reroutes, pump station storage references, burner phone coordination windows. A network. Not genius, not elegant, just disciplined enough to exploit exhaustion. She thought about the dead courier. He had known enough to run, enough to hide the notebook in a transfer bin, enough to put that child in a freight car and pray someone honest found them first. Not enough to survive it. Lena rested 2 fingers against the steel edge of the workstation and shut her eyes for one brief second. She was not sentimental about the dead. The dead could not be helped by softness, but they could be honored by accuracy. When she opened her eyes again, Deputy Lucas Reed was in the doorway, holding a foam cup like it was diplomatic aid. I was told, Lucas said, that if I entered your lab empty-handed, I would be vaporized. Lena looked at the cup. Who told you that? Honestly, my own instincts. She took the coffee. Your instincts are developing. Lucas leaned against the frame, careful not to touch anything. He had learned that much. How bad is it? Lena considered him. He was young but not fragile. There was a difference. People often confused the two and injured both themselves and others because of it. Systemic enough, she said. Localized enough to prosecute. Wide enough to hurt trust for a long time. Lucas absorbed that, rolling the foam cup seam under one thumb. The child gave a supplemental statement. Lena turned. To you? To the advocate. I just happened to be there when she agreed to clarify one thing. And? She said the courier kept repeating the same sentence while they were hiding. Lena waited. Lucas's eyes dropped briefly to the ledger under the hood. He told her, if they lose the count, people disappear inside the storm. For a moment the hum of the lab seemed louder. Lena looked back at the pages. Yes, she thought, that was exactly it. Not just supplies lost. People blurred, needs erased, names converted into weather. Did Ethan hear that? She asked. Lucas shook his head. Not yet. Tell him. Lucas studied her face. You think it matters? I think he already knows, but sometimes the exact language matters. Lucas nodded slowly. You know, when I started, I thought detective work was mostly speed. Answers, instincts, pressure. Today felt more like staying in one place long enough for the false thing to crack. Lena sipped the coffee, winced at how bad it was, and drank it anyway. That's because you're finally learning. He grinned faintly. "You make every lesson sound like an insult." "I'm protecting you from complacency." Lucas laughed under his breath, then sobered. "Captain putting together the expanded case file?" "Yes." "You think they'll come for her?" Lena looked back to the monitor. "They'll try to come around her. That's how institutions attack strong people when they can't attack the facts directly." Lucas folded his arms. "And Ethan?" "What about Ethan?" "He doesn't seem surprised by any of this." Lena paused, fingers over the keyboard. "That's because Ethan Cole is one of the few people in this building who does not require the world to be decent before he can function in it." Lucas stood with that for a while. Then he said, almost to himself, "Shadow does, though." Lena glanced up. Lucas nodded toward the hall, toward the lot beyond it, toward the dog who had found the child, the room, the charges, the fleeing man. "Not function, I mean. But he believes what's in front of him, entirely. No politics, no career math, just what is. That has to change the way you work." Lena looked down at the ledger again. "Yes," she said, "it probably does." In the rear lot, the city's noise came softened by distance and wet asphalt. Ethan sat on the low concrete edge of the loading ramp with both forearms on his knees. Shadow lay half across his boots, not asleep, not fully awake, simply resting in the deep, alert way of a working dog who had done hard things and remained ready if the world asked one more. Flood clouds were breaking westward now. Patches of clear sky showed through in strips of cold blue. Somewhere nearby, a generator kicked off and left a sudden pocket of rare quiet. Ethan liked this hour best after a case broke open. Not because it felt good, it rarely did, because it was the hour before narrative hardened, before press statements and interoffice revisions and self-protective memory distortions. This was the cleanest hour, the one where the truth still sat on the ground exactly where it had fallen. Shadow shifted and pressed more weight into Ethan's boots. Ethan's hand found the dog's shoulder without looking. "You took the right tunnel," one ear flicked back. "You found the locker." Shadow stayed where he was. "You found her first." That got the slightest lift of the head. Not pride, recognition. Ethan had worked enough years with enough people to know how rare full trust actually was. Most of what humans called trust was a negotiation with comfort. It held until stakes rose. Then it became caution, hesitation, process, revision. Shadow did not revise. If the dog said a thing with his body, Ethan either understood it or failed it. There was no politics in the exchange, no vanity, no hedge language. It was one of the reasons Ethan preferred animals to committees. The back door opened. Lucas stepped out first, then stopped when he saw Ethan in the half-light. "Am I interrupting a profound conversation?" Lucas asked. "Yes," Ethan said. Lucas nodded solemnly. "Understood. I'll keep my contribution shallow." He walked over and sat a careful distance away, stretching out his legs. For once, he did not fill the silence immediately. That, Ethan noticed, was new. Finally, Lucas said, "The child clarified something." Ethan looked over. "She said the courier told her if they lose the count, people disappear inside the storm." Ethan went still, not outwardly, inwardly, the way a line settles into place when you've been circling it all day. "Yes," he said after a moment, "that sounds right." Lucas glanced at him. "Lena thought you'd want the exact wording." "I do." The younger deputy watched the clouds for a while. "You know what bothered me most in that room?" "The bombs?" "Besides the bombs?" Lucas rubbed one hand over the back of his neck. "The calm, not ours. Theirs. Whoever set it all up. It was organized. They had labels, sequence, timers. It wasn't chaos to them. It was admin." Ethan looked at him. "That's because most real harm at scale doesn't feel dramatic to the people doing it. It feels scheduled." Lucas let out a breath. "That is an extremely bleak sentence." "It's also true." Shadow lifted his head and studied Lucas briefly, then rested it again. Lucas looked down at him and smiled despite himself. "Your dog judges people like a retired colonel. He's usually right." Another stretch of silence. Then Lucas said, lower, "I froze for half a second at the tunnel split." Ethan didn't rescue him from the admission. He let Lucas say the whole thing if he needed to. "I saw the left route first," Lucas continued. "It looked cleaner, more obvious. If I'd been alone, I'd have taken it." "You weren't alone." "I know." The rain-scrubbed wind moved across the lot. Lucas stared at the ground. "I followed you, but really I followed Shadow." Ethan nodded once. "Good." Lucas turned. "That's it? Good?" "Yes." "You're not going to give me some speech about trusting trained instincts under pressure?" Ethan shook his head. "No." "Why not?" "Because you already learned it. Speeches are for things that haven't cost enough yet." Lucas sat with that, and Ethan saw him accept it rather than perform around it. That was growth, too. The back door opened again. Captain Hayes stepped out this time, a folder tucked under one arm, her expression carved from the kind of exhaustion that had long ago stopped advertising itself. "Cole," Ethan rose. Shadow stood with him instantly. Hayes held out the folder. "Preliminary Task Force authorization. Expanded corruption inquiry. Annex sealed. Pump station sealed. Relief diversion review opens at 0600. Ethan took it. "Lena got us there?" he asked. "Lena got us there," Hayes said. "You and Shadow made sure there was a there to get to." Lucas looked between them. "Captain, I'd like it noted that I also contributed—" Hayes cut him a look. "You survived. We're all very proud." Lucas pressed a hand to his chest. "I treasure your warmth." Hayes ignored him professionally. Then her gaze dropped to Shadow. She was not sentimental by nature, but there was respect in the way she looked at the dog now, clear and undisguised. "He found the first truth and the last one," she said. Ethan nodded. "Yes." Hayes looked out over the lot. "The mayor's office is already calling this an emergency logistics discrepancy." Lucas made a wounded sound. Hayes continued, "They'll adjust their language once they see the charges." Ethan flipped through the folder. "And if they don't?" "They will." There was iron in her voice now. "I'm past asking politely." That was as close as Hayes came to fury, and Ethan knew it for what it was. Not outrage at insult, outrage at moral laziness. She looked at Lucas. "You're on Cole's support team for the next phase, which means you document cleanly, speak precisely, and do not mistake momentum for mastery." "Yes, ma'am." She looked at Ethan. "You get 4 hours, then I need you in briefing." "Understood." Her gaze lingered 1 second more on Shadow, who met it without flinching. Then she went back inside. Lucas watched the door shut behind her. "She scares me in a way that feels educational." "That's intentional," Ethan said. Lucas stood too. "I should go shower and become presentable enough for bureaucracy." He took 2 steps, then stopped. "Hey," Ethan looked over. "What the girl said." Lucas hesitated, then continued. "About you listening to Shadow. That wasn't small." Ethan said nothing. Lucas nodded, as if confirming something to himself. "Right. See you in 4." He went inside. Ethan stood alone again with Shadow and the files in his hand. The dog sat beside him, gaze on the dark edge of the lot, always reading, always ready. Not because he needed praise, because that was what he was made to do. Ethan crouched and put both hands briefly on either side of Shadow's face. "There are people alive tonight because you refuse to move." Shadow leaned forward just enough for their foreheads to touch. For 1 second the world narrowed to fur, breath, and the quiet certainty of a partnership that did not require language to be complete. Then Ethan stood. There was still work to do. The formal briefing at dawn felt to Ethan like all formal briefings after real danger, too bright, too dry, too eager to compress life into bullet points. But bullet points mattered. They were how truth survived rooms full of people who had not been there. Captain Hayes ran the table with blunt economy, timeline, discovery, annex contamination, pump station seizure, evidence recovered, charges pending, interagency coordination, child witness protection, public statement hold, doctor. Lena Morris spoke for 11 uninterrupted minutes and made the room understand, in exacting terms, that the case now lived beyond local spin. Her forensic chain was airtight enough to hum. Deputy Lucas Reed, to his credit, did not overtalk his field section. He described what he saw, what he heard, what he handled, and where he almost made the wrong choice. Ethan noticed that, too. A younger Lucas would have hidden the hesitation. This one did not. That mattered more than polish ever would. When it came time for Ethan's summary, a deputy chief from downtown, new shoes, old instincts, leaned back and said, "So the break in the case came from the dog's alert at the rail line." Ethan looked at him. "The first break, yes." The chief folded his hands. And you made the judgment call to halt demolition against standing schedule. Yes. Based on what, specifically? The room held still. The question was not invalid, but the shape of it was familiar, an institutional reflex toward translating instinct into something more comfortable. Ethan answered without heat. Based on Shadow's behavior being inconsistent with false positive search posture and consistent with live target certainty. The deputy chief nodded, unconvinced in the small bureaucratic way of men who preferred systems that could be blamed over instincts that had to be respected. Lena cut in before he could continue. If your question is whether the dog's alert was materially validated by subsequent evidence recovery, the answer is yes, overwhelmingly, several times over. That shut the line down. Hayes moved on. By the time the meeting ended, federal partners were inbound. City Legal had reversed its own disposal language, and the phrase emergency logistics discrepancy had died the death it deserved. As people filed out, Hayes stopped Ethan with a look. Lena and Lucas lingered too, unspokenly forming the small unit that had carried the case from sealed rail car to flooded vault. Hayes closed the door. "No speeches," she said. "I know everybody's tired." Lucas looked faintly relieved. "But understand this. The city was prepared to let the storm become explanation enough for whatever couldn't be quickly managed. You four prevented that." She looked at Shadow first, because by now even she was no longer pretending the dog was incidental. Then at Ethan. "You trusted what you saw," at Lena. "You proved it," at Lucas. "You held the line when it counted." Lucas blinked once, caught off guard by the directness of the praise, then recovered into stillness. Hayes nodded. "That's all." It wasn't all, of course. It never was. But it was enough. As they left the room, Lena murmured to Ethan, that was her version of standing ovation. Lucas, walking behind them, whispered, "I'm going to write that down before I forget it." Hayes heard him anyway. "If it appears in an email read, I'll deny everything." For the first time since the rail depot, all four of them laughed, even Ethan a little. And Shadow, hearing the sound, leaned into Ethan's leg with that same steady pressure as before, as if to say the work had not made them lighter exactly, but it had kept them intact. Later that afternoon, when the sky had finally cleared for real and sunlight hit the precinct windows like something returned rather than given, Ethan took Shadow out along the service road behind the building. No case file, no radio chatter, no urgency, except the kind a living body needed after strain. Shadow moved beside him at an easy heel, then drifted ahead when Ethan released him to free walk. The dog's gait had changed since the previous night. Not slower, not tired exactly, just settled in the deep way that came after a task completed all the way through. At the rear fence, the child's advocate was waiting. Not with the child this time, just with a folded note. "She asked me to give you this if I saw you," the advocate said. Ethan took the note. Plain paper. Child's handwriting, careful and uneven. He opened it. It read, "Thank you for finding the room before they burned it. Thank you for listening to Shadow. I'm okay when I think about his face." No signature. None needed. Ethan read it twice, then folded it once more and slipped it into the inside pocket of his jacket. The advocate watched him for a moment. She asked whether he knows. Ethan looked down at Shadow, who was standing in sunlight now, ears up, watching gulls wheel over the distant industrial roofs. "Yes," Ethan said, "he knows." The advocate smiled softly and headed back toward the building. Ethan stayed by the fence a while longer. The city beyond was still damaged, streets still broken, families still waiting on things that should have come sooner. Nothing about one solved case repaired that. He knew better than most the scale of what remained. But there was a difference now between damage and disappearance. The count had been saved. That meant the truth could not be weathered away into convenience. He looked down at Shadow. "Come on." The dog turned instantly and fell into step. Together they walked back toward the building, toward the next report, the next briefing, the next place where someone would try to simplify what should not be simplified. And Ethan knew with the quiet certainty that mattered most that when that moment came, Shadow would do what he had done from the beginning. He would stop where truth hid. He would hold there without doubt. And Ethan Cole would stop with him.